Welcome to the Holy Mountain Sessions. I am sitting here with John J. Thompson, Director of Music Industry Studies at Lipscomb University, and the host of the TrueTunes podcast. Mm-hmm. And he spoke at the first Holy Mountain event today.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you. I wanted to ask you, just right off the bat, what got you into music?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I mean, my mom says that my relationship with music goes back to probably when I was 6 months old or something. She said I was just a baby and she would sing to me and I would harmonize with whatever melody she came up with. So
Whoa.
I genuinely can't remember anything prior to being obsessed with music. And even from a young age, in fact, one of the profile pictures you'll see if you go to my YouTube or different social media things, you'll see a picture of me at probably 3 putting a record on a turntable. Like I was a curator at a very young age.
That's cool.
I was definitely obsessed with the idea that music was important, that there were messages in it. I mean, one of my first favorite records was a song by Tom T. Hall called Sneaky Snake. It was a kid's, he was a great country writer, but he did a kid's record, and Sneaky Snake goes sneaking, and if you're not careful, he'll drink all your root beer. You know, it's just a kid's song. But in the hands of a brilliant songwriter like Tom T. Hall, there's a lesson in there. Like, you got to watch out for those snakes. You know, it's like, I don't know. I'm just saying, as a kid, I was obsessed with listening to all kinds of music, digging for the messages in it. I was really interested in a much broader spectrum of music than most kids my age. I didn't have a friend group. We moved around a lot. So I didn't really know, white kids your age don't like black gospel music or blues music like that. You know, I just didn't know because I didn't have a frame of reference. But I honestly don't know what got me into it. I think it's just sort of innate in a lot of people.
DNA.
Honestly, I think it's probably in all of our DNA, but I think a lot of people don't have access to it, and they also other things crowded out. And so I think, and as a grandfather now, as a father of 4, I think that if you allow children to have access to music and if you encourage it and you don't just immediately distract them with other shiny things, they're just a natural aptitude for humans to want to listen to music. The problem is it takes some training, and there's so many other things that are easier to be entertained by. So we have shinier things and louder things and animated things and more boisterous things. But if you can carve a path for kids, and if you can keep that stuff at bay long enough, they can really cultivate a love for this stuff. But it was easier when I was little in the 70s than it is now. But I look at my grandkids and go, man, it's tough to carve that kind of path these days.
Why do you think it is? Why do you think it's so difficult now?
Well, media. When I was a kid, we had a television that didn't even start putting anything on it until 6 or 7 in the morning. And there was 3 channels or maybe 4 on a good day if it wasn't raining, right? So there just was a lot less stuff. And we had a radio, and then we had the world, and we could go explore the world. So music was one of the things that we could go to the records that we had. We could go to the radio and turn the dial. And when I was a kid, I had these headphones with radio built into the headphones, and I could just turn that dial. As long as the 9-volt was fresh or relatively fresh, I could just dial in anything. At night in central Illinois, in farm country, when the sun goes down, the AM side of that radio could pick up stations from Memphis, from Detroit, from Chicago, from Iowa, from all over the place. Now you couldn't even do that. There's so much noise, literal noise, electronic noise, interference. But then you think about when was the last time you saw a little kid that was bored? They're not bored anymore because they have devices in their hands. They're looking at screens. They're touching and poking, and they can't even ride in the car to go to the grocery store or to school without looking at a screen. Boredom is so important because boredom is when we start to sing. It's when we start to make up little melodies. We sing with each other. We become creative when we're bored. But boredom is when people can also start to market things to us, and parents get annoyed when their kids get bored because they start to ask questions and they make noise and they get restless. There just wasn't that stuff for us when I was a kid. And plus we were poor, and so we didn't have access to as many things. So we had our creativity, and we made up our little songs. And, my brother and I remember one time we were on a camping trip, and we've just found sticks and rocks and forks, and we were on dish duty. I think we were washing out pots and pans, and we just started making drum sounds out of this stuff, and then hooting and hollering. And before you knew it, we had this cool song going, and other kids from campsites were coming around and adding their music to it.
That's
cool.
cool.
Yeah, people are going, "What? Where did you get the idea?" I don't know where I think that the ideas are always out there. They just get crowded out by other stuff.
Well, and that particular story sounds like your first music festival in of its own, because you created your own little music festival right there at the campground.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, you've been involved in a lot. You're wearing your Cornerstone T-shirt, which is no longer a festival, but was for a very long time. And I know you were involved in you started when you were 13, going to it, and then
I was at the very first Cornerstone '84. I was 13. I turned 14 like the next week. So. I was born in 1970, but most of my birthdays in my life were celebrated either at or just after Cornerstone. So when Cornerstone ended in 2012, I'm like, I don't know how to have a birthday without 10,000 people to say happy birthday to. But yeah, I was at the very first Cornerstone, and it was actually at that event. Like I said, 13, almost 14. I watched, first in the afternoon, I went to 3 or 4 seminars. So I got to see Glenn Kaiser from Res Band, one of my favorite bands, teaching about music, musicians, and ministry. Now, it was a little bit over my head, just a little bit, but it's good for kids to be exposed to stuff that's a little over their head. I got to hear somebody do a seminar that was way uncomfortable for me about sex and sexuality and stuff that I was like, what in the world does this have to do with a rock and roll festival? But they were it was about discipleship stuff. Sure. And then I heard another one that had to do with inner city ministry. And I lived in the suburbs of Chicago. I'd grown up in the country, and I just thought it would be interesting to hear that. But they invested in their very first festival. All morning there were seminars and classes and different tents and buildings you could go to. And then in the afternoon there were smaller bands playing in the indoor stages. So you could watch bands that were more experimental. I'd never heard of some of them. New wave band playing with a lot of drum machines and keyboards, and a heavy metal band covered in studded leather.
Striper.
No, they weren't. They were been much bigger than these bands. It was a band called Saint, I think, or Messiah Prophet Band. I can't remember for sure. Striper didn't play at Cornerstone until I helped convince them to come back and do a reunion or a comeback show in like 2003, much later. But they were more playing in the mainstream. They were not a Christian market band. That's a whole separate thing. And Cornerstone would bring in artists that were actually not Christian artists. They were Christians who were making mainstream music. And that happened that day because there was one artist on the bill that they said, and there's going to be one artist. We can't even say who this is. It was in the advertising. They said, because of contractual obligations, this artist is not allowed to tell the public that they're even playing here. So it was a mystery artist. And who is this going to be? It's a secular artist. It's a Christian or become a Christian or something. So could it be Bob Dylan? Might it be Van Morrison? Like, who's this going to be? And there's a bunch of chatter now. It turns out a lot of people knew who it was, but I didn't. And it turns out it was this guy, Kerry Livgren. And Kerry had been in Kansas, which still by 1983 was one of the biggest classic rock bands. But Carry On Wayward Son, Dust in the Wind, all these. And I was a huge Kansas fan. And Kerry had written a book called Seeds of Change. He'd done a solo record, and he had just released his first project on a major secular label called Kerry Livgren and A.B., and it was fantastic. So when I got to the gate and I actually got my wristband or whatever it was, I said, who's the band? Who's the mystery band? And the guy at the gate was like, we can't say. I'm like, you can't even tell me now? And he's like, who do you think it is? I'm like, I don't know. It could be Bob Dylan. There's this Irish band I've been listening to, brand new band called U2. The Call, could it be The Call? I don't know. He's like, well, you're going to find out tonight, but we're keeping the secret pretty tight, And so I was at Glenn Kaiser's Music, Musicians, and Ministry seminar. Again, I'm 13. And they took a break. And I'm sitting on a cinder block in a gym. It's like a hangar kind of a situation. And I'm listening as best I can. And this guy sitting next to me kind of in coveralls, like he looks like a mechanic. And he's got a Fu Manchu mustache and short blonde hair. And he's sitting there, and during the break, he's like, what are you getting out of this? You seem a little young. And I said, yeah, I mean, I want to be a musician. I've got a band with my buddy, and, I'm really excited to be here. And so we talked a little bit, about a 15-minute break. So, and he said, who are you most excited to see here? And I said, well, this new band, the 77s, I've just heard a little bit of their stuff, but I think they're great. Res Band's playing later tonight. They're one of my favorites, but it's this mystery artist. I don't know if it's Bob Dylan or whatever. And then some people said it might be Carrie Livgren or it might be Kansas. And he goes, oh, really? Kansas? You think it could be Kansas? And I said, I mean, I don't know. Dust in the Wind sounds kind of Christian. And Carrie did this Christian record called Seeds of Change. And he's like, would that be cool if it was? I'm like, oh my gosh, it would be so cool if it was. Turns out that was Carrie Livgren that I was talking to, but I didn't recognize him because his hair was short.
Oh, wow.
And the Kansas records, he had this long. So then that night when they come out, I'm down front. I'm so excited. And they announce the mystery artist, and this Bob Dylan impersonator comes out. And I was so upset. I'm like, don't play with me. Like this, don't mess around with a kid. Don't play with my affections like this. Then they bring out Carrie Livgren. And when he comes out, he's like wearing the same clothes he'd been wearing. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's Carrie Livgren.
That's the guy I was talking to.
There's a minute where I swear he looks at me and he kind of like, hey, I don't know for sure. But years later, I made a movie about Cornerstone and we found footage. And so if you look at that piece of footage when Carrie Livgren comes out, there's like a little bit of a hint where he kind of looks down, and I'm like, I think that's that time when, but again,
that's cool.
But it was that kind of thing that Cornerstone, it wasn't just that the music was great. It was the teaching, the music, the people I met, the conversations I had, and it genuinely changed my life. I remember going home. I had a lot of health problems. I went through a lot of trauma as a kid, had a lot of stuff I don't have time to get into, but I went home and I wrote about an 80-page manifesto about what I was going to do. Essentially, if that had been a circus that was leaving town, I would have run away with the circus. And so in my heart and mind, I did. And I said, this thing, what it represents, this way of thinking about faith and culture and art and engagement, this was not like, I had just started to discover what people called CCM music. And some of it was okay. Most of it, But I also had always been really interested in how regular rock music had this spiritual side. Not all of it, but some of it.
Sure.
And that was what I was most interested in. Cornerstone seemed to be the sweet spot right between those things, where it was like they were really digging for that stuff. And then those seminars was where you could have really grown-up conversations about really hard stuff. And you didn't have to agree with everybody. They kind of liked the tension. They liked arguments. I just loved it. So I was like, okay, this is what my life's going to be. I want to be an artist, yes, but I also want to help connect this way of being thoughtfully, dangerously Christian with my generation. So that's when the idea to start TrueTunes came to me. I was 14.
Yeah. And you started TrueTunes as a record store first. Mm-hmm. And now it currently lives as a podcast.
Podcast and blog and stuff, yeah. It started when I wrote that manifesto. I basically did a bunch of research. And like I said, I was sick, and so I spent a lot of time at home, not going to school. So I wrote letters to a lot of artists. And I said, I don't understand, Mike Rowe of the 77s, why you're not the biggest band in America. Like, why Altar Boys are you not on MTV? I just didn't understand why these bands were so good. What was the problem? Why didn't I see them in Rolling Stone? Why didn't I? And I wrote to record labels, and I got letters back from all of these people. Well, I mean, a lot of them. They were I remember I got a letter from the Altar Boys. They were like, this is the first letter we've ever gotten from outside of Orange County. And so the bass player, Rick Alba, wrote to me. And I talked to people at Jesus People USA who ran Cornerstone, and I just was doing research. It's like, I don't understand. I didn't grow up in the evangelical fundamentalist kind of world. I grew up Episcopalian and kind of listening, like my parents didn't say you can't listen to rock and roll. So I was listening to great music, and great artists were talking about spiritual things. So I didn't understand why the 77s wouldn't have been on WXRT in Chicago.
Sure.
And then I even called and talked to some DJs. I called and talked to the DJs of the regular radio stations. And I said, would you play a record if you knew that the artist, if it was great, if you knew that the artist was a Christian? And I would have these conversations with DJs. And sometimes they would say, well, there's Christian radio. I said, no, I don't want to talk about that stuff. I'm talking about like Bruce Springsteen is a Christian, And he talks about it, but he's not making Christian music. And so I started over the years to learn that some music was called Christian music because it was primarily being marketed to Christians. It was really more of a marketing exercise than it was about the music. Where what I was getting excited about was how to make music Christianly, but make it for everybody. And so TrueTunes became a record store, a concert venue, a magazine, a mail order company that was a whole different way of thinking and talking about music from a faith perspective, but with wide open doors so it didn't matter if you came into the store and you were not a Christian, that you were totally welcome and you were never made to feel uncomfortable. You would just kind of go, oh, these are people that are kind of on the deep end of the spiritual pool, and we had lots of bands that would play at our club that were not Christian bands. We would just say, hey, there's a couple of rules. Like if you're going to swear intelligently and make it about like, like don't be dehumanizing to people. Don't be like insulting. But if you're upset about poverty or injustice and it causes you to use strong language, that's fine. Like Bruce Cockburn does that all the time. And like, that's not, but if you're going to say F you, like that's aggressive anger. That's not helpful, right? Sure. So be productive with your language. But we didn't care about the words, So that was what TrueTunes was. And it grew. And I would say that 50-60% of the music we sold came from the Christian world and half of it didn't. But it all had this spiritual yearning. And we were a direct extension of, even though we were not connected to, we were an outgrowth of that Cornerstone mindset. And so I launched TrueTunes at Cornerstone 89, so 5 years after the first one. And my band's first shows were at Cornerstone, and they had me speak at Cornerstone as a kid. I mean, I think I was probably 19 or 20 the first time I spoke and taught there. I met my wife there. I mean, I met her at church, but we kind of fell in love at Cornerstone. And years later, after TrueTunes kind of had its rise and then it got acquired by another company and they kind of shut it all down, I ended up going to work for Cornerstone. They hired me to come on and sort of be their music industry guy and to help them talk Nashville and think about sponsorships and think about marketing.
Wow.
Because they knew that I understood the DNA of Cornerstone.
Yeah.
But they also knew that I understood business in a way that they didn't. So, because they were a bunch of, commune people that, so I was the only paid non-Japusa guy that ever was on staff at Cornerstone. And so I was there for, I don't know, full time, maybe it was 7 years. And then after that, part-time the whole rest of the time. So probably 14, 15 years I was on staff.
Wow.
But I was the main stage MC, so I was, to the public, I was kind of the guy with the cowboy hat and the goggles that went out and introduced the bands. But really my job was to manage all the videos you saw on the screen and to deal with sponsors and all year long, help with thinking about the bands that we booked. I didn't really book everything, but I could speak to the booking process in terms of like what's happening in the industry and what are the trends going and that kind of stuff. And sometimes I spent a lot of time traveling to youth leader conventions and marketing the festival to youth groups that were kind of like the kind of youth groups that would like Cornerstone, because most wouldn't, but the ones that were cool and would. So yeah, I was full-time. And so from being in the front row as a 13-year-old kid to being on stage, and it was the same kid. Like I was just as big a fan. One of my favorite things anybody ever told me was, I guess it was Cornerstone 03 was the 30th festival or the 20th festival. And we did a big bash. We had, I think it was almost 30 artists or something like that, 20 some artists play in a 3-hour thing. So there's 3 zones on the stage. There was A and B and then a thing out in the middle, little acoustic thing. And I kind of coordinated the whole thing. So it was no dead time. It was just this band's playing and then acoustic and then this band and then acoustic and this band and then a video. And I produced the whole thing and I managed the whole thing. And it went off without a hitch. It actually ended early. And so Steve Taylor, who we talked into playing his first show in years, he had not played a show. He came out of retirement to play there and he actually got a little sound check. And it just went so well. And we made this movie, we made this Cornerstone documentary film at the same time to kind of talk about 20 years of the festival. But this guy came up to me and he's like, you know what I love is when I see you up there introducing the bands, and I was like, you're just a fan. You're like the fan that snuck backstage. Like you don't hide your enthusiasm. You're not, a lot of people are kind of cool. He's like, you're just not cool. Like you're not pretending to, there was no guile in what he was saying. But he's like, you're just not trying to be cool and you're not cool.
You're just a guy.
You're just the guy that snuck backstage and nobody told him to leave. And
yeah.
I'm like, that's exactly right.
So I know you connected Thomas online specifically, and they've asked you to come speak tonight at this first event because they're trying to build a music festival. They're planting the seeds to try to build one. What about their mission and their goals aligned with you? What sparked something in your mind that said, yeah, I'd like to, at least come speak with them. I'd like to, talk to them and, share my experience with them.
There's a few things. Thomas, it was kind of funny because I think he watched that movie that I made and got excited about Cornerstone. And then he mentioned it to another friend that goes to church with him. And that friend happens to be one of my best friends who was part of our house church. And,
okay.
And like, dear friend, he goes, oh, that's John. You should just get together with John. And he's like, you know him? Yeah. And so then I get a text from this guy that I didn't know, from Thomas. And he said, is there any chance we could get coffee? And now, to be totally transparent, I do, because of my job and because of what I do. And Nashville is such a networking town. I do get lots of requests to get coffee with people.
Sure.
Right? And so I had to it helped that this other mutual friends of ours, Zach, also pinged me and said, by the way, this is legit. And this guy is who he says he is. And, that stuff.
Yeah.
So we got together and actually talked, and it reminded me of when I was 15 and I came away from Cornerstone and with that manifesto. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to, because after doing all that research and finding out why are artists not able to connect? Why are they put into these weird columns where they're never going to find an audience? What are the problems? I researched that stuff, and then I came up with a plan for TrueTunes. And when I took that plan to people, now partly I was a lot younger. I was 15, by the time I did that, maybe 16. I was taking this plan and trying to sit with people. Most of them would tell me all the reasons it wouldn't work. It's too expensive. Nobody cares. Just open up a Christian bookstore, like do it like everybody else does it. And it was like the few people that would actually listen to me, there was only a couple, and they're friends to this day. They're still mentors in my life. But when they would take time and say, you can do this, kid, and here's where it's going to be hard, and here's the questions you need to be thinking about. Those few people shaped my life, shaped my career, and enabled me to do what I'm doing. So I've always tried to be that type of person for other folks. Usually the questions are more songwriters and artists trying to figure out how to connect and have a career. It's rare. Maybe there's been 2 other times that somebody has come and said, I want to do a festival, and I know your connection to this, and I want some advice from you specifically about this. And then usually when I talk to them, it turns out they don't really want to do that. But he was asking the right questions, so then I thought, well, yeah, I'll keep answering questions as long as I can. The second thing would be that I really genuinely feel like we are in the midst of just a massively problematic era. That I think that people that came through the 60s didn't realize how radical and tumultuous and seismic the problems of the 60s were until it was over. Mm. I talked to people of that generation, and they say, no, I didn't know that it was, you just kind of are going through it and you go, this isn't really good. I'm not happy about how things are going. But you don't realize until later. I don't think we realize how bad things are right now in so many levels. And I've been saying this, my last book called Jesus, Bread and Chocolate, which was almost 10 years ago. The subtitle is Crafting a Handmade Faith in a Mass Market World. And the context was, I was seeing how commodified Christianity has become over the last quarter century.
Yeah.
And it really goes back long before that, but that we as Christians have adopted the values of the Industrial Revolution way more than we ever shaped them. We just kind of passively let corporate values shape us. And it's like the frog in the kettle. And we start to think things are good if they work. And if it's bigger, it's better. And profit is king and all this stuff. When you're in the music industry, some of that is inevitable because it is a business and it has to make a profit to survive. When you're in the church and those values decide how your church functions, you're screwed. Like, it is upside down. That is not how the kingdom is supposed to operate. So when I encounter Christians and churches and pastors who are literally borrowing the playbook of Walmart to drive their pastoral sensibilities, I'm like hair on fire panicking. And what I saw as a reluctant insider in the Christian music industry, I did not want to go that path. My path was always more towards the mainstream, but with Christian values imbued into my work. But I kept getting pulled into the Christian music side, and I spent 10 years working in the industry after my years with Cornerstone. But my spiritual formation was so formed by Cornerstone Festival and being a pastor in the inner city and my roots in the Episcopal Church. It was different than most of my Christian friends here in the South. And I thought, man, where would I be without Cornerstone? Like, the revolution that happened in my life we don't evaluate the efficacy or the impact of Cornerstone, I don't, by how big it was. I mean, the numbers are impressive, but it's not about the scale, it's about the depth. Those of us who were a part of that thing for any length of time, we can talk about the depth and the resonance and how it changed in a way that stays with us forever. We did our deconstructing 30 years ago when we sat in a tent with someone and went, oh, man, maybe this part of my faith is built on the sand and I should be building it on the rock. Maybe I should stop listening to these political voices because they're lying to me and they're trying to turn my faith into something political. Maybe I've adopted this corporate sensibility about what works and it's profit driven, and I need to disabuse myself. I was doing that 30 years ago because I was sitting at the feet of people from the counterculture of the Jesus movement who hadn't been co-opted by Reagan and all that stuff. And I was a kid and I was impressionable and I was listening and learning. And then I got to learn more by doing and then by teaching. So I thought, we need these things. Festivals now, honestly, are just massive orgies of consumerism. I mean, Bonnaroo and Coachella and all, I mean, you look at the list of these things and you look at the poster and there's 300 bands in 2 days and they cost $1,000 to go to. And it's all about corporate sponsors and money.
It stopped being about the music a long time ago.
Yeah. And how many of those bands can you even physically see in 2 days? It's like comparing the value of a smorgasbord. If you're driving on the highway and you got to think, where am I going to eat? Where am I going to eat? And then you see a billboard that shows you all of this food and you can eat it all for $19, as much as you can eat. Just gorge yourself, shove it in until you puke, right? For $19, all you can eat. But you think about it, you can only eat as much as you can eat. And that food's not that good. What would you rather do? Eat until you're full on a bunch of crap? Or find good food, carefully prepared, that's healthy, that's a good portion, and pay the same amount of money, or maybe even less. But we have this mindset in America that we need it all, and we got to shove it down our pie holes until we're engorged. And we've done it with food, we've done it with sex, we've done it with music, we've done it with everything, our houses, all of our stuff. And so there's not a line between how we've done it with our spiritual formation and how we've done it with our consumerism. And when I look at these festivals, I'm like, this does not look fun. Where's the sitting around the fire talking about life? Where's the seminars? Where's the controversy? Where's the activism? Where's all that stuff? I don't see that happening at these things. All I see is this small print bands I've never heard of with a few at the top I have and a huge ticket price that makes sure that only rich people can go to these things. And then corporate sponsors selling a bunch of stuff all in the margins. And that is, festivals, and we'll talk about this tonight. Festivals have existed for as long as society has existed. Mm-hmm. And they are always an extension of and an expression of the values contained in those societies. So if you were to go back to Babylon, 2000 BC, and find the first Akira festival that archaeologists have uncovered evidence of, if you could somehow go back to that festival and attend it, that festival would tell you what that culture valued. It would tell you about what they feared. It would tell you about what they loved. It would tell you about their creative expression, what their talents were. That's what festivals do. If an alien came from outer space and went to any, or maybe not any, but most of the big festivals and said, we're going to judge the values of America or the West or whatever by the festivals that they present, what would they see? Like, what do you think the values they would come away with?
It would be hedonism. The value is hedonism, and right. It's like you said, just it's an orgy of consumerism. Yeah. It's the way to discover myself and understand myself is by taking hallucinogenic drugs and having that experience.
Right.
That's not a true understanding of spirituality. It's not coming from a place that's really exploring.
It's a cheat code.
It's a cheat code. Exactly.
Right.
That's a perfect way of putting it. It's a cheat code.
Right. So to me, Christian music festivals now, there used to be festivals that still had some kind of genetic connection to the Jesus movement.
Yeah.
And I don't want to assume that people know what I'm talking about when I say the Jesus movement. And there's been even a movie that I was a part of, the Jesus music movie. And most modern conversations about the Jesus movement locate its nexus back to Orange County and Calvary Chapel and all that. The fact is, the Jesus movement was a global thing that happened from the late 50s into the early 70s. It was not, it did have an expression in Southern California. That's totally true. And in 1972, Explo 72 is the most well cataloged, and it was probably the largest expression of it. In my opinion, it's also probably the end of it. I think that by the time 200,000 college kids gather in Dallas, and it's the same time Nixon wanted to go to that thing, they were trying to talk him into it. He eventually said and the organizer said, actually, we don't want you to come. Well, he sent an emissary there. It turns out his goons were breaking into the Watergate during Explo. It's all happening at the same time. And fortunately, and Billy Graham was actually going to Nixon to try to talk him into coming to Explo. And I've listened to the tapes, and we hear like the beginning of the confluence of right-wing, pro-Vietnam, strange anti-Semitic. There's like real weird stuff in their conversation about getting the Jews out of banking and all this stuff. And they're in the Oval Office talking about it, and anybody that wants to can go listen to these recordings. And it's happening as the Christian evangelical community is trying to get into bed, actively getting into bed with politics. But the Jesus movement was before that. The Jesus movement was all these like radical kids who just almost like a spontaneous brush fire around the world, in Africa, South America, Europe, up and down the West Coast, San Francisco, well before LA, Florida, the upper Midwest. They, with that same thing you're talking about with psychedelic drugs, there was this cultural yearning amongst the baby boomers to find God however they could, because they weren't finding him down at First Baptist or at the Lutheran Church, right? And their parents, the baby boomers, had been so focused on building suburbia and kind of recovering from the trauma of World War II, and some of them World War I and the Depression, their grandparents, that they were not really digging into the deeper spiritual end of the pool either. So the baby boomer, I'm sorry, that would be the greater generation that did that. So the baby boomers, my parents' generation, a lot of them were going, well, maybe we'll try drugs. Maybe that will help us find God. And for some of them, I guess it did. But for most of them, it was like, well, it felt spiritual, but it was a dead end. But when they started to encounter Jesus as a countercultural, long-haired, sandal-wearing peacenik, they were like, this guy we're down with. This guy eats a lot of fish. Like we're into this guy, right? And so, and now some of that is a cultural affectation. Some of that is sort of a co-occurring coincidence, maybe. But it worked, and there's all these signs and wonders that are happening and around the world. But that Jesus movement was a genuine thing. It was big in the Catholic Church. It was big in the mainline church. It was not located only in the Protestant or even the evangelical church. So then with the Catholic Church doing their Vatican II reforms and allowing people to use acoustic guitars for the first time in church, and what do? They play folk music. What's popular with the kids? Folk music. So you have priests and nuns marching for civil rights in Washington, marching against Vietnam, and the kids going, wow, our spiritual leaders are on the same side. What kind of music are they singing? Folk songs. We are one in the Spirit. We are one in the Lord. We are one, and we'll pray that all unity will one day be. Like, these are folk songs from the Catholic Church that were sparking and fueling the Jesus movement long before it jumps. It's like you say, where did this forest fire start? Well, it kind of started in 50 different places. Lightning struck all over the place. It's just that Calvary got put in Time magazine or Life magazine or Look magazine. Like, so history's written by whoever had the best photographer. It's like, and so, but the Jesus movement was countercultural before it became subcultural. And now Christian music festivals have almost no connection to the Jesus movement. Some of them there might still be a couple that have some kind of technical connection to it. But like the Creation Festival that's gone now, for a long time, it still was connected to. Cornerstone was directly connected to it. It was run by a bunch of Christian commune living hippies that were from the Jesus movement. And it was the only one that really still embodied the values of that. But most Christian festivals now are driven by Christian radio stations. They're like K-Love festivals.
It's money. It's marketing.
Well, sure. And I don't want to say that. I mean, that's true and that's fine. That to me isn't the biggest reason that I emotionally disconnect from it. It's because, frankly, there's a lot of great music being made by Christians now that is never going to be played on The Fish or K-Love, right? The most exciting music to me is independent, and it's made by hip hop artists and rock artists and indie artists and singer songwriters. They're nowhere near that stuff, and they're nowhere near those festivals, right? Now, every so often, a Forrest Frank or somebody like that kind of lightning strikes, and they get in there, and then they'll play those festivals. But for the most part, the big Christian festivals are for moms and whoever mom can drag to the festival. It's not the kind of countercultural, crazy, dangerous thing that's going to change your life like Cornerstone was. So when I talked to Thomas and he was talking about, we want to do something that people that aren't believers would come to. We want to do something that independent artists would come to. We want to do something that will cover a lot of different genres. We want to do something that's dangerous, and we want to have conversations and classes and all this stuff. And then, because honestly, the most exciting festivals are the ones where the music is kind of an excuse for people to get together. Really what we want is community. We want fellowship. We want to be together. And then we listen to the bands, but the most fun I had at Cornerstone was after the shows, sitting around a fire with people, and what was fun was like towards the end. Early on was the best because you're young. It's like you're a kid and there's nothing like that. So there was no strangers. Like everybody was your best friend. You just hadn't met them yet. And so you're wandering. One night I literally went into the wrong tent thinking it was my tent, and I unzip it and I open it up and I was like, oh my gosh. And there's like 7 people sitting in a circle in this tent. And I'm like, I am so sorry. And they're like, no, come on in. we just got some fresh brownies or whatever. And I was like, I'm like one row over, and you have a red Chevette and I have a red Chevette, and this is the exact same tent. And the guy's like, no, seriously, what's your name? And one of those people still follows me on Facebook. Like, you're the guy that came into our tent at Cornerstone 86 or something like that. Like,
that's so great.
But I just don't imagine that kind of stuff. We ended up having this drop down argument about the rapture. Like, this guy was really, really into the rapture. And I was like, I think that's metaphorical language. I don't think that's literal language. And it's become a little safer to believe that now. Back then, it was like all those evangelicals were super into the rapture. Anyway, I think that what he was talking about, what he is talking about, what you guys are trying to do, I'm like, hey, I want to be the guy like that read my business plan and was like, you can do this, kid. Here's the pitfalls and here's the problems, but why not? Like, try it. But then, there's very few people on this planet that have the kind of experience with this stuff that I do. And I'm like, I know which rocks have the snakes under them. And so I'm going to probably point those out at times. And some people are like, oh no, I love snakes. Snakes don't bite me. And I'm like, okay, well, good luck with that. So everybody thinks they're bulletproof.
Briefly at the beginning, you mentioned you've written a couple of books. and most recently you wrote your first novel,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called The Ballad of the Lost Dogs of East Nashville.
Yeah.
Would you like to plug that? Tell us a little bit more about it.
And what's funny is that it actually fits in with all this stuff because it even has references to Cornerstone in it. And the very first page, you find out that there's this accidental band that's been formed with old people in their 60s and 70s making music with college students. And it's black and white and Hispanic people making music, and it starts in a garage just a few blocks from here on Basketball Street in East Nashville. But what these people were after was community. They didn't even want to be a band. They didn't think of themselves as a band. But what they did sparked something. And because the younger people are social media savvy and they start posting things, people in the neighborhood start coming. And then the people around the town start coming. And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And they can't contain it. So you find out on the first page that this band, this accidental band, has been offered a gig at Bonnaroo. And they're like, what are we going to do about this? Because it's gotten so big they can no longer play in the garage. They can't even play in the park. They just played a benefit show in East Park. It's literally just right down the street. And it was a thrilling night, but they're like, we can't even do this. Like, it's kind of a rock and soul fable, somebody called it, but it's a little magical, but it reveals, can some things get so big that they actually undermine their reason for being? In some ways, that's what happened to Cornerstone. It got so big in the early 2000s that there was one year when we literally couldn't go to the bathroom. Like, the bathrooms couldn't get cleaned fast enough. People couldn't park their cars, so they just left their cars on the road and walked the rest of the day.
Oh, wow.
It was a disaster. People were camping next to they just hopped the fence and started camping over there. They're like, this looks like grass. Turns out they were in somebody's field, and then cows were on top of their tent in the morning.
Oh,
like, it was a disaster. And people go, well, grow, grow, grow. And the thing was, the Jesus people folks, like, love them like family, but they're not business people, and they're not thinking in terms of profit and costs and liabilities and all that stuff. They're just thinking, we're reaching more people. We're reaching more people. So whenever they made a profit, they turned around and spent that money. Well, let's cut a new road so that people don't have to wait in line as far. Let's get more toilets. Let's make it better for everybody. Not realizing things don't always go up. Sometimes they go down. And so that the scale, the growth actually was what undid Cornerstone, because at the same time, the bands like Reliant K and Not Need to Breathe, but Me Without You, and some of these bands that they came from the Cornerstone dirt and blew up, and all of a sudden they're on the Warped Tour. So now this festival, you got to put that one in scare quotes, it sets up in parking lots and malls around the country. And for $50, you can go watch all of these pop punk bands and rock bands for a day or two. And that pulled a lot of fans away from Cornerstone. So Anne Berlin and some of these bands, for one thing, their fees got really high. The audience started to go to the Warped Tour and not drive all the way across the country to Cornerstone. So scale undermined Cornerstone. In my story, this band has to decide, are we going to play Bonnaroo or not? So, and also as a professor of music industry, most artists would kill to play at Bonnaroo. They would kill to have this kind of thing.
Right.
So I start the story with every band's dream, and then I work backwards and say, why is this actually potentially a nightmare? And I talk about their backstories and talk about what are we really after. It's about reconciliation and community, about 50 years of East Nashville history. And there's even there's a little cameo from Glenn and Wendy Kaiser from Res Band, who started Cornerstone. They show up in the 70s in one scene that's actually true. At one point in the 70s, Res Band set up in Shelby Park here in East Nashville and just played in the park. And so they told me that, and I kind of made up a fictional version of that with one of the characters. So it's a lot of fun, and it's been mostly focused on distribution here in East Nashville, but I have a website now that's lostperros.com, or LOSTPERROS. So people can go there and hear a sample of the audiobook, or I wrote an original song for it too and got to record that with Phil Keggy. So
really cool. That's really cool.
But it's also on Amazon and it's available beyond there, but it's fun. And I kind of like everything else I've done. It's designed to not really be for Christians. It's written in a way that I hope everybody leans into it. And the band in it is trying, the people that know me will go, oh my gosh, this is a very JJT kind of experience. But what's been really fun is that a lot of people that have read it so far here in the neighborhood, they don't know me from a hole in the wall. So like next weekend, I'll be at the Tomato Arts Fest, a block from here, and I'll be set up in the middle of all the action, just signing copies and selling them to my neighbors. And that's, I'll be literally in the middle of where the story takes place. So.
That's really cool. Hey, well, thanks for coming out and doing this with me today.
Absolutely, yeah.
It was really cool to hear from you. Really a blessing and an honor to speak to you and hear what you have to say. So
I think if you have a chance to listen to the episode we did on the Cornerstone Festival, it's like 2.5 hours long, but we got to talk to the founder of the festival. We got to talk to Glenn Kaiser, had a bunch of people that went to the festival send in their memories, had a lot of audio from that film. So it's a good audio documentary that kind of updates that film that we did. But if you look up TrueTunes Podcast or just search TrueTunes Podcast Cornerstone Festival, you'll find it. But it's worth checking out. I think you guys get a lot out of it. So.
Yeah. Side note, if I flip over the poster that was the CD insert for Five Iron Frenzy's Proof That the Youth Are Revolting live at Cornerstone, am I going to see your name on there?
I don't remember. Probably. I was in a lot of CD. One guy came up to me at Cornerstone one year. It's so funny. Some people would have me sign copies of the TrueTunes magazine. That wasn't the weirdest thing ever. But and some people would have me sign my own My band is called The Wayside, and we would play at Cornerstone all the time. We were the one like alt country roots rock band, especially in the era when everybody was either a ska band or a metal band or something. So we were the band that they called us the country band. But one guy shows up with a box of CDs. There must have been 50 CDs in that thing. And he's like, "Can I get you to sign something?" I figured one of those must be a Wayside CD or something. And I had produced one hardcore band, and so maybe once. And I was busy at Cornerstone. Like I'm running from this stage to that stage to this stage. I'm announcing bands. I'm doing stuff. And I had a little office in a trailer, and he caught me on my golf cart, like flagged me down with this box and a Sharpie. And I'm like, "Yeah, okay. What do you want?" And he's like, "Well, these are all CDs I've collected over the years that you're mentioned in the thank yous." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And he's like, "So I wondered if you could sign them." And I looked at the box. I was like, "I'm in the thank yous of all of these things?" He goes,
That's
"Every
funny.
one of them." And I
That's
said,
incredible.
I said, "Yeah, no, man, I'm not." I said, "Pick one and I'll sign." I signed his box.
That's really funny.
I said, "But that's really cool." I took a picture of it. I was like, "That's kind of cool." I wish I still had that picture because it was like, over the years, you're just like, sometimes you don't even know it, but it's like, that was kind of a fun thing to see that and go, I shouldn't take that for granted. That's pretty sweet.
That's a really
and amazing that guy noticed that. Kind of creepy.
Thanks for talking to us today.
Sure.
I really appreciate it.